Welcome to Driven by Dreamz. Today's guest is Shayne Adler, co-founder of Aetos Data Consulting, a firm that helps startups and small businesses navigate the complexities of data privacy and compliance. With a background that spans law, nonprofit leadership, and an MBA from the University of Michigan, Shayne brings a unique blend of strategic thinking and operational expertise to the world of entrepreneurship. She's passionate about building solutions that deliver real value to founders, their customers, and the broader community. Let's get into it. Hi, Shayne. It's great to meet you.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me. It's nice to meet you.
Can you share a bit about your journey?
So I'm relatively new to the entrepreneurship journey. I panicked following undergrad and went to law school, and I started my career thinking I was going to go into the legal field and follow a very lockstep sort of path. But once I got into it, I started to realize it was a misfit. And I ended up, luckily, because the legal market crashed in 08, 09, right when I was graduating, I had already decided to sort of pivot and apply what I was learning in law school to something in the nonprofit world at the time. And I've been heavily involved in nonprofits, and I ended up kind of being thrown into the world of nonprofit operations, which I really enjoyed. It was really interesting because with operations, you get to see the whole organization. And I liked the work, but I had no formal training. Like I said, I was thrown in. I decided when we were expecting my oldest, I stepped away from working outside the home, though. And then when my younger child was ready to start elementary school, I looked at everything around me and I was like, I want to go back to working. I really want to find something exciting to do outside the home again. And it had been a while, so I decided to do that, create a launching pad for myself by going to business school and formalizing my training in operations. I went to Ross, go blue, and I specialized in tech and ops and management and organizations. And I set out looking to apply that, like program management, project management, something kind of in the same vein as I had been doing previously. And then something kind of crazy presented itself as an opportunity. So my husband actually attended business school at Cambridge at the same time I was earning my MBA. He did his dissertation on regulatory compliance around GDPR, which is the European privacy regulations, and how you can leverage that compliance for a competitive advantage in business. We were reading through the dissertation again because it's getting published soon as a white paper, and started discussing the content of it. And we realized there really was an opportunity in the market to actually take what he had researched and turn it into a service, because he was specifically addressing startups and small to medium-sized businesses. He was working with a lot of entrepreneurs in his program, and a lot of them they sort of didn't know what they didn't know, and also didn't have access to resources at the level they needed in order to comply with all of these crazy regulations that are getting passed and the patchwork of laws that are out there. So we sort of looked at each other, and he was a subject matter expert. I had the ops, and we decided to put it together and create Aetos, which our last name is Adler. Aetos is Greek for eagle. Our daughter is a huge Greek mythology fan, so we chose the name based on that. And now we provide fractional compliance officer services specifically for those startups and SMBs that would otherwise be doing nothing.
Well, that's amazing. What helped you make both of those pivots? The first one being the one doing nonprofit work, and the second one being the one that inspired you to start your company.
So when I started out going to law school, I really thought that it was a set path. I was looking for that security. I grew up in a family of lawyers, and it seemed like a safe bet. And I think I was just not ready to take a real risk. But as I started learning the substance and interning, I realized it wasn't a good personality fit for me. I needed that room to be creative and think strategically. I needed to be able to apply my systems brain to solving problems that weren't just the ones handed to me within some very narrow constraints. And as a lawyer, you have a lot of guardrails on what you're going to do. It can be very creative depending on where you're going, but I wanted to look at systems and figure out that side of it. And then with starting Aetos, it really was this synergy of the idea being there. The idea seemed so viable, so alive, so relevant right now. So Michael, my spouse co-founder, he was at the forefront of GDPR compliance when it launched back in 2016 to 2018. So it was passed as regulation in 2016. It became fully enforced in 2018. And we were seeing a lot of the same patterns with AI regulation in particular. And I specifically found AI regulation really interesting. And I've been learning the governance and getting certified and doing the trainings because it is this opportunity that is so timely.
What were some of the biggest operational challenges you faced while launching Aetos?
I think it's less in the operations and more in the communication, actually, because first of all, we have the curse of knowledge. We know exactly what we're saying. Actually, the first time we sent an early draft of our website to somebody for review, for a read, their feedback was, "It looks amazing. What do you do?" So getting through that communication actually has been the biggest thing. And then the other facet is just in figuring out how to package it, because our biggest competitor is a company doing nothing, which obviously is not great long term, because number one, not complying at the early on, it's really hard to undo some of the work you are building on. Undoing it is more time and resource intensive. And then also there's the risk of harm in the interim. But because these companies are small, they are often operating on a very limited budget or very limited revenue stream. It feels easy, and it feels like a tomorrow problem to deal with compliance and laws, because regulators don't often look at these smaller companies. It's just that they don't realize that the regulators aren't actually the main audience for what they need to be doing.
You mentioned that it's easier with smaller companies. So, are you planning on moving on to bigger companies in the future? And how do you think it'll change if you do that?
So, it's not that it's easier with smaller companies. It actually can be harder because they don't have the bandwidth. But it is easier to build your foundation correctly with compliance and build that into your design, build that into all your processes from the outset, I think is more what I wanted to communicate there. Once a company is established, and we have dealt with companies that are more, that are further along, I'll say, and the process has to change. It has to be completely different, because you are almost taking things back. You're almost having to rewind and rebuild. You're having to untangle some of the knots. You're having to put new processes into existing processes and change behaviors instead of just inventing them de novo. There was a company that we dealt with a liquidity event but we were on the buyer side. The company wanted to sell to a bigger company, and they hadn't dealt with all of this stuff early on, and they didn't know what they didn't know. And it started, they were going to sell their company for 8 figures. And not huge 8 figures, but that's something, right? You've spent years building this. And it came out in the diligence process and the review of all the documents, everything, that their product wasn't built on data that had been handled compliantly. And so it was subject to algorithmic disgorgement, which sounds like it makes me giggle, let's be honest. But unfortunately, it was a tragic result because it meant they had to delete a lot of their work. And not just the information inside the program, but the program itself. And so they ended up having to sell for about 4% of the initial valuation. And that's avoidable, but we have to be able to communicate to founders and the product teams and everything that they need to pay attention to these facets as they are building.
Well, thank you for clearing that up. But for those in our audience that don't know, what exactly is data compliance?
So, we do compliance across a bunch of different areas, including marketing, social media, that sort of thing. But the hot button issues tend to be data privacy and AI. And I like to think of it as data privacy is like the foundation. You need that because AI is built on data. You need data to train AI. So right now, there are existing regulations that govern how you handle personal data, personally identifying information. The 2 biggest ones, especially if you're in the US, that you have to pay attention to are CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Regulation, and GDPR, which is the General Data Privacy Regulation. GDPR. I always get tongue-tied on the actual terms because everyone just uses the shorthand. And with GDPR comes e-privacy. There are also a patchwork of laws federally and statewide in the US that apply to all kinds of different sectors. So basically, all of these regulations exist to ensure that nobody's putting your name alongside your social security number into a database that's not secure. Or in the US, a lot of the sectors that are highly regulated have to do with healthcare, finance, and children. So you want to do something where you're dealing with ed tech that applies to kids. You need to be really careful because you're dealing with children's data. And then in Europe, a lot of the regulations apply to different areas. It's a little interesting to look at, but the GDPR came out of some directives that were developed post-World War II. So a lot of the data they're worried about has to do with your political affiliation, your immigration status, or racial or ethnic origin. They're very protected in the workplace and school. So they look at all of these different types of what we call sensitive data, and they put extra protections on anyone who's going to handle it, hold on to it. They require that you only collect as much as necessary and no more. You only collect data for a specific purpose. You have to, and you also have to give the actual consumers, the people whose data you're handling, the right to correct, to delete, to access their own data, and have a degree of control. And that's all out there to protect individuals who don't, individually have as much power. And there's with that, so now we have the AI Act in Colorado, in Europe. All AI, like I said, is built on data. And so this is kind of like an extension of all of that. That's hitting the books, hitting the legislatures, but it's the wild, wild west. We don't really know what enforcement's going to look like. But so far with GDPR and CCPA, regulators are taking it very seriously, and there are massive penalties. For GDPR violations, it's up to 4% of your global turnover, and we're not talking net, like we're not talking profits, we're talking about your gross revenue. So if you are bringing in 100 million a year, that's 4 million right there just for a GDPR violation. And the practical result of that is that customers, particularly in B2B and business-to-business transactions, are becoming increasingly sophisticated about what to ask, because the penalties, the ramifications, they extend to people who use a product, who use a non-compliant product, even if they're just a vendor. So I don't know if you heard about like the Target data breach a few years ago, a little while back.
Yeah.
It wasn't actually Target. It was one of their vendors, but they were held equally responsible because of how these consequences kind of spill over and how the penalties are applied, and also just the PR. No one cares about this third-party vendor with a small company name. They care about making headlines with Target.
Well, thank you for talking about that. So sales is often one of the hardest parts of launching a company, especially in a complex space like compliance. So how have you approached sales enablement at Aetos?
That's the $64,000 question, and I think I'm dating myself by even using a number that small. That has been the biggest thing, because we're strategy people, we're ops people. Like, I like the details, but doing sales has been a massive step outside my comfort zone, just being completely transparent. So I've been trying to approach it like a personal growth exercise as much as anything. It's, we have brought on an AE, and he's amazing, to help us with some of that, because sales is such a massive skill set. It's a talent. And having the energy to put yourself out there for sales is something I really admire. Trying to develop it and cultivate it myself. And we've actually started working with a fractional chief revenue officer to advise us on strategy, because I like to think that I'm open to admitting when I don't know what I don't know. And I try to keep a growth mindset, because while we are out there, we are putting out educational content, we are reaching out to people we know, or people who know people we know, to do that direct outreach, make those connections, build that network, and get our value proposition out there. There's always better we could be doing. So I think bringing in experts, bringing in people who know the rhythm of it and the cadence better than we do has been the best thing, and asking questions.
You said that you're proud of taking risks outside of your comfort zone. So what's one risk you took that really paid off?
One risk that paid off, I think just jumping in with both feet and taking the agile mindset approach to building a business has been the biggest one. My younger child, my son, is 8. He's in 3rd grade, and for Mother's Day yesterday, he gave me like one of those cute little worksheets they do, and he said his favorite thing to talk to me about was learning about my business and learning how to do business. And he said the business, which sounded a lot cooler. But just having that, just having that, I guess, taking that risk to even say that I'm doing this was a huge step, because when you put yourself out there starting a business, it opens you up to all sorts of criticism. And most of it's not to your face, so you can't even rebut it. So I think that was something I'm really proud of, as far as getting, like, just opening myself up to that, and even just doing this, talking to you. I really hate public speaking. So but it all comes with the territory, so I'm trying to embrace it.
Well, you're doing great.
I appreciate it.
You mentioned building Aetos around a triple bottom line. So could you explain what that means and why it's so important to you?
I could not do this just because I thought that I could make money at it. I need a degree of sincerity behind anything I would be asking someone to pay for, in order to sleep at night, frankly. And so when we were creating this concept for Aetos, it was important to us that we could stand behind anything we were saying. And we talk about the triple bottom line mostly amongst ourselves, but it's that, number one, we love the subject matter. I love talking about it. I think it's really interesting. I think it's something most people don't know about, so there's an opportunity for education. It's just fun. And I enjoy that I get to talk to my husband about it, and we're sharing something that we both find interesting. So that's one benefit. Secondly, the companies that we are helping typically are not able to access high quality guidance in this area. Hiring a full-time compliance officer, base salary is somewhere from $300,000 to $500,000 a year. Plus, then you have benefits and all the incentive packages that would come with that. And that's out of reach for many early stage companies, most, I would argue, early stage companies. But at the same time, there wouldn't be enough work at an early stage company for somebody to do it full time, because they need to build their product. It doesn't make sense to hand them all of these things to do when they're just worried about getting their beta out the door. And hiring an attorney where you're paying by the hour, an expert at the level that would be necessary to get this quality would be somewhere from $1,500 to $2,000 an hour. And you would have to onboard them, and then you would get legal advice as opposed to pragmatic business advice. And so you'll get, 25 to 40 page memo that says all the things that you should be doing to comply. None of it triaged, none of it prioritized, none of it tailored to where the company is going to be able to get the best ROI. So that benefit, being able to confer that at an affordable day rate price to these smaller businesses, these startups and SMBs, confers that benefit because they can access that expertise. And then finally, the more companies that are in compliance, the better off their consumers are, their customers, because their data is going to be handled properly. They're not going to be at risk of having their information exposed or their personal health information out there for some reason. It benefits like the public at large for that like public interest benefit, the reason these regulations exist.
Well, for listeners that are curious about a career in data or compliance, what types of degrees or certifications would you recommend they pursue?
Well, a lot of lawyers get a certification in this area. but you don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to go to law school and go through that whole process. There are plenty of people with a background in technology or business or something even just adjacent to it. What it would require is some sort of education in the regulations and the standards and practices. The biggest organization I would say is the IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, and they offer certified information privacy professional certifications, AI governance professional certifications, and they also do a lot of free education on the subject as well. There's conferences. Michael just spoke at the one in DC about California compliance. And those are great opportunities to connect and dive into the world and find out if it's something that's a good fit, meet other people who do the work. That would really be the central resource or repository of information if you wanted to get your feet wet.
Thanks for sharing that. So what advice do you have for women or parents looking to re-enter the workforce or pivot careers later in life?
I think going into it later in life and with other competing priorities is in itself a masterclass in prioritization. And going back to one of my favorite phrases, that growth mindset, because having kids watching when you're doing these things, number one, you're modeling how to be a student if your kids are young and they're just starting out in school, and I was very mindful of that. And so that there's almost like oversight at all times, that you are hyper aware of how you're presenting and how you're talking about your challenges, your problems, your frustrations, your successes. And then later in life, there's a perspective that I didn't have before. I think in all through my schooling career, I went straight through from kindergarten to law school. And I was a very type A student. I had a lot of my ego invested in grades. And coming back to it, I was so much more focused on the substance and the learning. I had that breather to realize that grades are not the be-all, end-all. And they're important as a proxy when you're going on to other things, but getting an A doesn't mean you understand. And I think that was a huge lesson for me in coming back to being a student and pivoting careers. And then finally, as a woman, I think, honestly, it's tough. Like, I'm going to be honest. There's a lot of double standards. There's a lot of pressure on things that are completely unrelated to your actual ability. But there's also the ability to subvert expectations in a lot of ways that kind of makes it fun. I really enjoy subverting expectations and coming out with knowledge that people wouldn't expect because they have prejudices. And I feel like there's a lot of power in how you communicate when people are expecting you to be a certain thing or they're pigeonholing you. That's their weakness. And it's available to exploit. So I feel like it's a little bit of manipulation, but for the greater good.
Well, thank you so much, Shayne. I really enjoyed our chat today and I learned a lot from your insights. So thank you for taking the time to share your experiences.
Thank you so much. I appreciated the opportunity. It was really great to meet you.